This is the big lie of socialism, that completely free market leads to maximum inequality, and therefore regulation is needed. As you can see from observational data, however, the situation is exactly the reverse. The more you regulate the economy, the more inequality you would get. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert D. Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. So, this video I will call the big lie of socialism, and it's one of those in case you didn't know types of videos, because we're gonna be talking about observational data, which is really hard to deny, okay? So I've actually already highlighted this piece of data in one of the earliest videos on this channel, back when I've still talked about economics quite a bit. You see, now I don't do it anymore because, well, everything is already clear to me in case of economics, so I'm just not that interested in it anymore. But you may ask me some questions, if you wish, about the details. But anyway, we shall define, in this case, socialism as government regulation of the economy, okay? And obviously it is always motivated by helping the poor and introducing more equality in this way or another at the very least, okay? However, the results, as we shall see, are always the opposite. Like, the more you regulate the economy, the more inequality there is, actually. Always, again, to a never-ending surprise of the socialists, okay? Like, they're asking, like, how's that possible? Well, let's take a look at the data, alright? So, I've actually made this graph and this table that I'm gonna show to you in 2020, again, back then, when I was interested in this stuff. I just wanted to make this video to kind of solidify this point, because it kind of got buried all those years ago in the middle of some random video of mine, okay? So I wanted to kind of focus your attention on it. So I made this Google document. I'll link it in the description so you can check the data yourself. But once again, it was the data from 2020, okay? So here we have all the countries in the world for which we have data, that is. Specifically, I was interested in some measure of economic freedom, or, you know, vice versa, some measure of regulation, but I actually took the measure of freedom, and also some measure of inequality, right? And we shall try to correlate or find that there is no correlation between them, between the freedom and inequality. So for a measure of inequality, I took a very classic index, Gini index, okay? So I'm not gonna give you a definition of what it is, like in case you're very interested, you may look it up yourself, but it's a very, like, you know, precisely defined mathematical thing. It's not just some vague nothing, okay? Like, it's a very precise procedure of how you calculate it. But for our purposes, let's just say the more Gini index is, the more inequality there is. So it's a pretty straightforward index of economic inequality, okay? So I took the data on Gini index from World Bank, and I've also needed, again, some measure of economic freedom, and for this I've used actually it is literally called Economic Freedom Index, which is regularly published by Cato Institute. Now, mind you, this is an independent, like, meaning not governmental institute, but again, if you want to propose your own index that would measure an economic freedom, be my guest. We may recalculate, or you may recalculate, since you have the data anyway yourself, okay? And let's compare the results. I would be very interested if you find something else, okay? So anyway, let's take a look at the results, specifically this diagram that I've had. I'll probably show you the picture on the screen. So as you can see, there is a clear trend line, specifically going from top left to bottom right, okay? And right here means more inequality. So we have Gini index in the bottom going from left to right. So right means more inequality, okay? And the bottom, from top to bottom, we have economic freedom diminishing. So index of economic freedom goes from bottom to top. So top is the freest and the bottom is the most regulated, okay? So the less economic freedom we have, meaning like the lower we go, the more inequality there is, the more to the right we go. That's why the line goes top left to bottom right, right? So from a lot of freedom, low inequality, to less freedom, more inequality, okay? So this is the trend. And obviously there is some corridor, you know, due to some variations between countries, right? We have some variance due to a whole multitude of different factors. So we have this more like a thicker line, you know, around this trend line. But with again, sort of representing these deviations from the mean. But this thicker line still follows the same trend, as you can see, okay? In case you're interested, the outlier on the right, like the most unequal country in the world, so to speak, is South Africa, okay? But it still follows the general pattern, as you can see. And the bottommost point, the huge outlier in terms of like the least free economically country in the world would be Venezuela. Again, that would, this was like 2020 data, but still, I mean, there's probably not a whole, not a whole positive, things going for them anyway. So again, as you can see, Venezuela is still much more unequal than the absolute majority of countries in the world, okay? And again, it's a socialistic country, right? So yeah. Anyway, statistically, you may analyze this, and you would, for example, we may calculate what is called the Pearson correlation coefficient, and it would be equal to minus 0.34. There's actually, I use the formula below the table. I mean, if you scroll down, you will see it at the very end. So minus 0.34 means there is a medium negative correlation between Gini index and economic freedom. Why is a negative correlation? Well, because the sort of, the more inequality we have, the less freedom we have, right? So it's a kind of inverse correlation. Yeah. So, and then the index, the coefficient itself, it goes from like -1 to 1. So 1 would be a perfect 1-to-1, you know, straight line correlation. And -1 would be a perfect 1-to-1, but negative correlation, right? And here we have 0.34. So like around 0.5, you know, kind of like intermediate, value, but, noticeable correlation, okay? So again, let's summarize. The more regulations you have, the more inequality there is, period, okay? Like not the perfect correlation, of course, but still a medium strength. And again, you see both graphically and again numerically if you calculate the Pearson's coefficient. Of course, socialists might propose at the very least 2 arguments against this. So argument number 1 would sound something like correlation doesn't mean causation. And I absolutely agree. However, in this particular case, I do not care, right? Because what I do care about is that socialistic thinking actually assumes that more regulations are better, right? So socialism effectively predicts a reverse type of correlation, like from bottom left to top right, meaning that, you know, unregulated, completely free market, so we're at the very top, leads to the most inequality. We're at the rightmost, right? So we should have a point at the top right, uppermost, rightmost, so to speak, point, right? And vice versa, like the more regulation, so lower economic freedom, the less inequality, right? So you will have this line. In reality, we have this line. So socialism predicts this. In reality, we observe this. So whatever, like, even if you say correlation doesn't mean causation, socialism predicts an opposite type of correlation. So it's wrong, you know, clearly, observationally. So yeah, that's what we get. That's argument number 1, okay? So we refuted this counter argument, so to speak. And argument number 2 that they may say, that they may give you, is that it's again a very typical socialistic argument, is that these are just bad regulations, you know, just introduce better regulations, or let me regulate, you know, as they always kind of think in their minds. So again, it's the same. True socialism has never been tried yet, right? Give me power, I'll introduce the true socialism, right? Well, I'm sorry, like, if we are being real, the world cannot propose you any other types of regulations, as you can see. Like, we literally took every country, at least again with an asterisk that every country that we have a data on, okay, on this graph, and they all show the same trend, okay? So, whoever you are, wherever you live, you will come up with the same type of regulations that would reproduce the same type of pattern, right? Yeah. And keep in mind, again, half of the world, if not more, is already ruled by openly socialistic governments in the first place, right? So it's not like they're trying to do something bad. Maybe some of them, or even most of them, are actually trying to do something good, right? Like at least 95% of all regulations are always, at the very least on paper, about protecting the poor and reducing inequality. But somehow the result is the opposite, right? The more you regulate, the more inequality you have. Yeah, again, somehow. And there is another comment I want to make, is that generally there is a trend, or at least seemingly, like I haven't looked into data actually, so I might be wrong here, but kind of intuitively I feel, and I know it's a weak argument, but bear with me. So generally I think there is a trend on increase in regulation in the world in the first place. So as time goes on, we have more and more regulations, right? And generally, there's another clear trend in the world for increase in inequality, okay? So it would be very easy for me to just take a time series and plot like the amount of regulations, like, you know, time, the regulations go up, time, inequality go up. You see correlation, right? So, but it's a low-hanging fruit, you know, it's too easy. That would be too simple and a bit dishonest, again, because both of these trends could be attributed to various factors, which I don't want to comment on, and like there's huge variety of them, okay? Just think about the technological progress, just how much more stuff just is being invented and appears constantly. So obviously lawmakers think, hey, we need to kind of think how would we work with this, like we need to give this definitions, etc. And so, you know, the more and more pages are getting added to the regulation codes and things like that. So anyway, so instead what I did is what you just saw, okay? We took this snapshot of all the countries taken together, on which we have the data anyway, and compare them at a single moment in time, right? So in this way we effectively negate these worldwide trends. Or at least we have an opportunity to ignore them, right? And also we have simultaneously an added benefit is that we consider countries with different ethnicities, different cultures, different religions, different geographical conditions, and we still see that all of them still follow the same trend pattern, right? All of them behave exactly the opposite to what socialists would tell you, right? So, yeah, this is the big lie of socialism. This is an observational refutation of the main point, or at least main motivation of socialism to begin with, right? Once again, I repeat, the main motivation is the absolutely free market is the most unequal, gives you the most unequal society. It's just clearly observationally wrong. It's exactly the reverse, in fact, right? Like it's a truth standing on its head, basically. So yeah, and it could surprise only people who know nothing about economics. Again, Marxists included. Whereas to people who've studied economics, it is not a surprise at all, alright? People like Cantillon, Bastiat, Jean-Baptiste Say, right? Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Murray Rothbard, you know, the Austrian economic school, etc., etc., etc. Any sane economists, basically, they were saying that exactly this in the last like 2+ centuries, right? That the more you regulate and reduce the free market, you know, the more inequality and poverty you get. This kind of line, right? Okay, yeah. And once again, in case you want to learn economics, just read a very short book by Bastiat, actually, Frédéric Bastiat, the French thinker. What is seen and what is not seen. It's the best book on economics because it's incredibly simple and it's very brief, okay? But you'll understand the main idea, like it's just this brilliant gem of, you know, this French spirit. Like the French rationality is so clear and like beautiful, actually. Well articulated, okay? And it's very short and it's very entertaining, actually. Yeah, what is seen and what is not seen, Frédéric Bastiat. So, conclusions. So, this is the big lie of socialism, that completely free market leads to maximum inequality, and therefore regulation is needed. As you can see from observational data, however, the situation is exactly the reverse. The more you regulate the economy, the more inequality you would get. End of story. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing. If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.